The Alaskan wilderness had a silence unlike anywhere else on Earth, vast, cold, and absolute. The snow-covered ridges stretched endlessly toward the horizon, their white peaks cutting against the sky like blades. Between them lay valleys of pine so thick and dark they seemed to swallow sound itself. It was a place both magnificent and merciless, where beauty and danger lived side by side. And for Cole Turner and Brett Lawson, it was home. They had been friends for nearly 20 years, the kind forged not through convenience, but through shared danger. Near-death storms, broken bones, and nights spent lost under the stars. Cole, 37, was the quieter of the two, a man who believed the wilderness was not to be conquered, but respected, a wilderness guide by trade. He'd spent most of his life charting the wild edges of Alaska, his calm under pressure legendary among those who knew him. Brett, 35, was the opposite, talkative, impulsive, quick with a joke even in the face of danger. Together, they were an unlikely balance, caution and chaos, patience and bravado. Every autumn, without fail, they embarked on their 2-week moose hunting trip deep in the Alaskan backcountry. It had started as a college tradition, a test of endurance, but over the years, it had become a sacred ritual. It wasn't just about the hunt. It was about escape. Out here, there were no phones, no noise, no eyes watching, only them, their rifles, and the forest. In early September of 2011, the men loaded up their truck with supplies and drove north from Anchorage, following the old dirt roads until the tree-line swallowed the horizon. The weather forecast was clear, light snow, no storms. They joked about how easy this trip would be compared to the last one, when Brett had slipped into a freezing stream and nearly lost his boots. The first few days passed in perfect rhythm. They set up camp near a frozen creek, pitched tents, stacked firewood, and hung food away from bears. The weather was mild, and the forest felt alive. Cole noted animal tracks in the snow, wolves, elk, even a bear farther up the ridge. He kept a detailed log in his notebook each evening, marking their trail and conditions. Brett, as always, recorded everything with his handheld camcorder, narrating in his usual playful tone. Day 2. No moose yet, but Cole swears he heard something big near the ridge last night. Probably his stomach growling. I'm betting on elk. He's betting on bad luck. That night, they sat around a crackling fire, sharing canned beans and old stories. The aurora shimmered faintly overhead, streaks of green and violet moving silently across the sky. Cole leaned back, watching it dance above the pines. Hard to believe anyone else exists when you're out here, he said quietly. Brett grinned. That's the point, isn't it? Out here, it's just us and the wild. It was the last peaceful night anyone would ever record of them. On the 4th day, a cold front rolled in unexpectedly. Temperatures plummeted, and the wind carried a sharp, unnatural howl. Cole made a radio call to their contact base at noon. The voice on the other end, a ranger named Harper, later recalled that Cole sounded calm but uneasy. Weather's turning faster than expected. Cole said, we might need to hunker down for a few days. Brett's scouting near the ridge. We'll check in tomorrow. But halfway through the transmission, the signal fractured. A burst of static cut through, followed by faint, distorted words, a second voice, faint, like an echo, then silence. The next morning, Harper tried to radio them again. No answer. He assumed they'd lost signal in the storm, but after 3 days with no contact, concern turned to alarm. Search and rescue was dispatched immediately. When the search team reached the ridge 5 days later, they found the campsite exactly where the men had mapped it, but something was wrong. The tent was slashed open, not cut cleanly but torn from the inside out. The campfire was cold, the ashes still damp from melted snow. 2 rifles were missing, but the rest of their gear, including food, flashlights, and extra ammunition, was untouched. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no footprints leading away, just silence. The snow around the camp was oddly smooth, as though it had been swept clean. The search dogs, trained for wilderness recovery, refused to approach the tree line. They whined, circling in place. Their hackles raised. Rangers tried coaxing them forward, but the animals backed away, tails tucked. Trembling, "I've never seen dogs react like that," one rescuer said later. As the team spread out, searching the valley, one of the men, an experienced woodsman named Reed, reported hearing something strange from the distance. "Voices," he said, "like someone calling from down below, echoing through the valley. I thought it was them, but when they followed the sound, it vanished, replaced by the hiss of the wind." After 7 days, the official search was suspended. The report listed the cause of disappearance as undetermined environmental factors. The media called it a tragic hunting accident, but the locals knew better. Alaska's wilderness had taken many before, but this felt different. Cole Turner and Brett Lawson had not just disappeared, they had vanished. As winter crept in, the story faded from the headlines. The camp was abandoned, reclaimed by snow and silence. But those who had been there, those who had seen the smooth snow, the torn tent, and the empty woods, they would never forget the feeling that the forest itself had been watching. It was as though the forest had opened and swallowed them whole, one rescuer said quietly. Years later, leaving only the echo of their last words. The Alaskan wilderness doesn't give back what it takes, at least. That's what people in the nearby towns began to say after the disappearance of Cole Turner and Brett Lawson. As the months turned into years, their names became part of local folklore, a cautionary tale whispered in bars and ranger stations across the interior. In the immediate aftermath, the search efforts had been relentless. Teams of rangers, volunteers, and even private trackers combed through the valleys and ridgelines for weeks, hoping for any sign of the two men. But as winter buried the region in ice, the operation was called off indefinitely. The official reports listed their status as missing, presumed dead, but for those who knew them, the story didn't feel finished. For Hannah Turner, Cole's wife, grief became routine. Their small cabin near Talkeetna sat untouched, frozen in the same state it had been on the day he left. His coffee mug still rested on the counter. His boots stood by the door, mud still clinging to the soles. Hannah refused to move anything. She told herself that when Cole came back, not if, but when, she wanted everything to be exactly as he remembered. Each winter, she lit a lantern in the cabin window that faced north toward Denali. It became her ritual, a silent beacon for a man lost to the wild. Sometimes she would sit in his old armchair, holding his flannel jacket, whispering into the empty room. "You'll find your way home." For Mark Lawson, Brett's younger brother, grief turned into obsession. Mark refused to accept that the wilderness could simply erase two men without a trace. He spent years gathering data, topographic maps, weather reports, even hiring his own team of bush trackers. He launched a website titled Finding the Lost 2, posting updates, tips, and coordinates of every reported sighting. None ever panned out. But what kept the story alive wasn't the families. It was the public fascination. Alaska had always attracted wanderers, conspiracy theorists, and storytellers. And the Denali disappearance, as it came to be known, became one of the state's enduring mysteries. Theories began circulating everywhere. The most reasonable suggested a bear attack, a large grizzly ambushing them at camp, dragging their bodies into the dense brush. But the lack of blood, torn fabric, or prints made that theory collapse under scrutiny. Others speculated that the men had turned on each other, a fight gone wrong in the isolation of the wilderness. Some even believed Cole had staged his own disappearance, that the wilderness guide had simply walked away from his life. But the theories that stuck, the ones that made people shiver, came from the locals. Hunters and bush pilots started sharing stories of a place that didn't exist on any map, somewhere near the ridgeline where Cole and Brett vanished. They called it the White Woods. Some claimed it was cursed, a pocket of land where compasses spun and sound distorted. Old-timers swore they'd heard voices there, not echoes, but answers. Online forums fed these stories, giving the mystery new life. Reddit threads, podcasts, and YouTube channels picked apart the case in obsessive detail. A few users uploaded distorted audio clips they claimed came from the area. Strange, low hums mixed with faint human whispers. What had begun as a tragic accident was now something else entirely. A legend. As the decade passed, pilgrims of curiosity started visiting the site. They left offerings, small tokens, coins, and photos at the edge of the ridge. They said it was to keep the forest quiet, a superstition born from the growing myth that the woods took what it wanted, but would spare those who showed respect. Meanwhile, Hannah's dreams became darker. She told her sister that she could still hear Cole's voice, sometimes calling her name, sometimes whispering things she couldn't understand. But there was one phrase that repeated often, echoing in her sleep like a warning: "Don't follow the lights." She would wake drenched in sweat, staring at the window where the lantern burned every night. The same light she once believed would guide him home now felt like an invitation to something else, something watching from the dark beyond the tree line. For Mark, those same 10 years aged him more than any lifetime could. He stopped his search after his third expedition into the backcountry nearly killed him in a blizzard. When reporters asked him if he still believed his brother was alive, his only response was, "Not alive, but not gone either." By 2021, the Denali disappearance had become a campfire story for tourists. Locals sold maps marked with possible locations, and every Halloween, radio stations replayed the original emergency dispatch call. The mystery was no longer tragedy. It was entertainment, but for those who had lived it, the pain never dulled. The cabin remained frozen in time. The lantern still burned every night. The forest, cold, still, and vast, remained unchanged. And then, one October morning, everything changed again. A trapper named James Lowry, making his rounds along a frozen river 60 miles from where the men had vanished, found footprints in the snow, bare, human, fresh. They led to a man huddled near the tree line, emaciated, frostbitten, barely conscious. When the trapper knelt beside him, the man opened his eyes, lips cracked and pale. "Don't follow the lights," he whispered. At the hospital, after DNA confirmation, the impossible truth came to light. It was Cole Turner, 10 years after vanishing into the wilderness. One of the two hunters had come back, barefoot, silent, and barely alive. The trapper who found him would later say that, at first, he thought the figure in the snow was a ghost. The man appeared in the pale light of dawn, standing barefoot in the frost, his skin gray with cold, his clothes in tatters. He wasn't moving toward the trapper's cabin, just standing there, head tilted slightly upward, as if listening to something no one else could hear. When the trapper, James Lowry, called out to him, the man didn't answer. He only blinked, slow and deliberate, before collapsing face first into the snow. It took nearly 3 hours to get him back to the nearest ranger station. By then, his body temperature had dropped dangerously low, and his pulse was faint but steady. When they cut away the frozen layers of clothing, they found nothing that identified him. No wallet, no tags, not even the kind of gear a hunter should have had. But his fingerprints told the story that no one could have believed. The man was Cole Turner. After 10 years, one of the missing hunters had returned. News spread through the small Alaskan towns like wildfire. By evening, reporters had gathered outside the hospital in Anchorage, broadcasting updates every hour. Theories erupted online: a survivor story, a cover-up, an elaborate hoax. But those who saw him in person knew this was no stunt. Cole Turner looked like a man who had walked out of a grave. When doctors examined him, they found signs of extreme malnutrition and frostbite on his feet and hands. Yet his internal organs showed minimal damage for someone who had supposedly endured years in the wilderness. His lungs were clear. His bones showed no signs of long-term starvation. It didn't make sense, as if whatever had kept him alive hadn't obeyed normal rules of time or biology. When he finally woke, the first thing Cole did was shield his eyes from the light. The nurse thought it was reflexive, but when she dimmed the lamps, his pupils reacted strangely, expanding and contracting unnaturally fast. as if infused to brightness. It was as though he'd lived in complete darkness for years. He didn't speak for the first 24 hours. The medical team thought his memory loss was a form of trauma-induced amnesia, common in missing person survivors. But when they asked if he remembered where he'd been, he whispered something that made one of the nurses step back. "The lights weren't stars," he said softly. "They called him." When asked who he meant, Cole went silent again. The next few days were a blur of questions, interviews, and endless tests. Every major network wanted an exclusive. The FBI reopened the case. Local police issued new search orders for the Denali Ridge. Everyone wanted to know what had happened in those 10 lost years, how 2 men had vanished without a trace, and how one had come back. But Cole had no answers, only fragments. He would sit by the hospital window at night, staring into the dark beyond the parking lot, whispering under his breath. The nurses noticed that he refused to sleep unless the lights stayed on. When one nurse accidentally switched off the lamp during a night shift, Cole woke screaming, thrashing so violently that security had to restrain him. When they asked what had triggered the panic, he muttered, "They wait in the dark." Doctors considered the possibility of hallucinations, an after effect of prolonged isolation. But what unsettled everyone most was the calmness in his tone. He wasn't frightened in the way trauma victims usually are. He was certain. When Cole was finally stable enough to speak with investigators, his first question wasn't about himself. It was about Brett Lawson. "Where's Brett?" When they told him Brett was never found, Cole's pulse spiked on the monitor. The machines beeped rapidly as his breathing grew ragged. He whispered something the attending officer almost didn't catch. "He's not missing," Cole said. "He stayed." The investigators pressed him for details. Stayed where? Stayed with who? But Cole's answers dissolved into nonsense, half sentences, broken phrases. "The valley opened," he said once. "The sky moved wrong." He followed the light. He shouldn't have followed the light. Doctors noted that Cole's recollections seemed to align with symptoms of dissociative trauma, but his physiological signs told a different story. His blood work showed abnormalities, unusually high melatonin levels, as though his body had adapted to perpetual darkness. The ophthalmologist who examined him claimed his retinas had undergone changes consistent with people who spend years in environments with minimal light. Yet his body hadn't aged the way it should have. Hannah Turner, Cole's wife, visited him on the 5th day. She stood at his bedside, hands trembling, as if afraid he might disappear again if she got too close. Cole looked at her, but didn't speak at first. Then, quietly, he reached out and took her hand. "You kept the light on," he said, voice barely audible. "I saw it." She broke down in tears. But Cole's eyes didn't match his words. They were distant, as if he were looking at something beyond her, something only he could see. In the following weeks, Cole's recovery became national news. Reporters called it a miracle. Survival experts debated how he could have lasted a decade in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Theories ran wild. Maybe he'd found shelter, or joined a hidden community off-grid. But nothing fit. Cole's DNA matched exactly. The scars on his arm, the fracture on his left wrist, all the same as before. Only his demeanor had changed. The once calm, confident guide was now quiet, withdrawn, and haunted. He spoke in riddles when asked about the missing years. "It was cold, but not snow," he said once. "Dark, but not night. We followed the sound until we realized it wasn't leading us out. It was leading us down." No one understood what that meant, but one thing was clear. Whatever came back from the wilderness was not the same man who went in. Whatever came back from the woods, it wasn't the same man who went in. For months after his return, Cole Turner remained under medical and psychological supervision. His body had healed, but his mind was fractured, trapped between memory and something darker. At first, his doctors believed his fragmented recollections were the result of trauma and isolation. But as Cole's therapy sessions deepened, what surfaced began to defy any rational explanation. During his 3rd week in recovery, his physician, Dr. Elaine Rhodes, suggested hypnosis therapy, hoping to bypass the blocks in his conscious mind. Cole agreed, though reluctantly. I don't want to remember, he said before the first session, but I think it wants me to. The room was dim. The only light a soft lamp beside his chair. As the minutes passed, Cole's breathing slowed, and his voice dropped to a whisper. At first, the fragments were ordinary, flashes of cold, snow, and wind. Then the tone of his voice shifted. It started with the storm, he murmured. The sky changed. The sound came from the ground. Dr. Rhodes asked him to describe what he meant. Cole hesitated before continuing. A low hum, he said, like thunder under the snow. You couldn't hear it, you felt it. Moving through you. Brett said it was just the wind, but I knew it wasn't. The ground was breathing. His breathing grew uneven. His fingers twitched on the arm of the chair. The storm hit fast, wide out. Couldn't see 5 feet ahead. Brett kept shouting. Said he saw a light through the trees. He thought it was our campfire. Said we'd gotten turned around. But the light. It wasn't fire. It wasn't the moon. Dr. Rhodes leaned forward. What was it, Cole? His eyes flicked open for a moment, pupils wide, unfocused. It moved wrong, he whispered. It shimmered, like it was alive. He said Brett ran toward it before Cole could stop him. Cole followed, the snow nearly blinding him. He remembered calling out Brett's name again and again, until the sound of his voice stopped echoing. There were no echoes anymore, he said. The snow was swallowing sound. Then, silence. Dr. Rhodes asked what happened next. We found a hollow, Cole said. An opening beneath the trees, like the earth had cracked open. Brett climbed down first, said he saw shelter, said there was warmth. His voice faltered. But it wasn't shelter. He began trembling violently. The heart monitor spiked. There were tunnels, he continued. Cold, black tunnels, carved by something, not nature. The walls were smooth. There were markings, not writing, but shapes. Lines that moved when you looked away. Dr. Rhodes gently called his name, but Cole didn't respond. His next words came out in a ragged whisper. The dark wasn't empty, he said. It was watching. At that point, Dr. Rhodes ended the session. Cole awoke confused and shaking, sweat pouring down his forehead despite the cold room. You shouldn't look for it, he told her before being sedated. The storm doesn't make it appear. It calls it back. Dr. Rhodes documented everything. Though she admitted privately she couldn't determine where trauma ended and truth began. Still, her notes reignited the investigation. A new search party was organized to return to the ridge where Cole and Brett had vanished a decade earlier. Among them were park rangers, geologists, and forensic specialists. They used drones and ground-penetrating radar to scan the area for any underground anomalies. After several days, the equipment detected a large subsurface cavity, an unnatural cavern hidden beneath layers of ice and rock. When the team began excavation, they uncovered the collapsed entrance of what appeared to be a cave system. Inside, they found evidence that someone or something had been there. Near the mouth of the cavern lay remnants of makeshift shelter, torn fabric, rusted metal fragments, and burned-out lanterns. The walls bore deep carvings, crude but deliberate, made with a hunting knife or similar tool. What made the discovery chilling was what the carvings said. He's still here. The phrase repeated over and over, scratched into the rock in erratic lines. Forensic handwriting analysis later confirmed the impossible. The carvings matched Brett Lawson's handwriting. The team continued deeper, documenting strange features in the stone, patterns resembling spirals and circles, as if something had tried to etch its presence into the earth itself. But the deeper they went, the stronger the unease grew. When Cole was shown photographs from the cavern, his reaction was immediate and violent. His hands began shaking uncontrollably. His pulse spiked. No, he whispered, eyes fixed on the photos. That's not where we were. The investigators exchanged glances. Cole, these carvings were found near the ridge, where your camp used to be. This is where you and Brett. He cut them off, voice trembling. That's not where we were, he said again, louder this time. Then, softer. That's where it began. Dr. Rhodes leaned closer. Cole, what began? But he only stared at the photo, at the carved words. "He's still here," and whispered. "We followed it into the dark. Brett stayed because it wanted him to." Cole never agreed to another hypnosis session after that day. He told DR. Rhodes that some memories should stay buried, that the more he remembered, the more it remembered him, outside. The investigation continued, but those who returned from the ridge reported strange things. The drones malfunctioned mid-flight, compasses spun in circles, and several searchers swore they heard voices echoing through the canyon. Their own names whispered softly, carried by the wind. The official report called it environmental interference. The locals called it proof. Had the two men found shelter in the storm? Or had they found something that was already waiting for them? 6 months after his return, Cole Turner disappeared again. It happened quietly. No storm, no warning, no note. On a gray April morning, his truck was found idling on a dirt road near the edge of the Denali Forest. Headlights still on, the driver's door open. Inside, investigators found his jacket, a thermos of coffee, and his wife's old lantern, the one she used to keep burning in the window every night he was gone. It was still lit. Cole's wife, Hannah, told police she'd woken around 3 a.m. to find him standing by the window, staring into the tree line. He said he heard something, she told them, her voice trembling, said Brett was calling his name. When she reached for him, he smiled faintly and said, "It's all right. He found the way out." That was the last time anyone saw him. The official search began that same morning. Crews scoured the frozen terrain for weeks. But there was nothing, no tracks, no sign of struggle, no scent for dogs to follow. It was as though he'd walked into the forest and simply dissolved. Whispers began spreading again. Just like before, locals said the Denali disappearance had claimed its final victim. Hunters reported seeing a man standing on the ridge at dusk, still as stone, staring toward the horizon. One claimed he called out, thinking it was Cole, but the figure didn't move. When he blinked, it was gone. By summer, the story had resurfaced across the country. The man who came back changed had vanished once more. And this time, there were no explanations left to give. A year later, in early 2022, melting ice near the southern slope revealed human remains. A hiker spotted fabric beneath a thin layer of frost, a torn jacket sleeve, and the edge of a boot. When rangers arrived to investigate, they found the body perfectly preserved under the permafrost, as if it had been waiting there, untouched by time. The DNA confirmed what many had feared. It was Brett Lawson. The condition of the remains was extraordinary. Forensics determined he had died of exposure, consistent with freezing to death, but the rest of the evidence didn't align. His skin showed no decay, no signs of scavengers, and the position of the body suggested he'd lain down calmly, almost peacefully. What unsettled investigators most, however, were his eyes. Despite being buried in ice for over a decade, the tissue around the pupils was abnormally scarred, not from cold, but from severe light damage. One analyst described it as if he'd been staring directly into a floodlight for hours. The discovery reignited the obsession. News outlets returned to the story. Podcasts called it Alaska's most haunting mystery. Online forums speculated wildly. Aliens, government experiments, interdimensional rifts. But in Alaska, among those who had lived through it, the story took on a quieter, darker shape. Locals started leaving small wooden carvings near the ridge, tokens etched with antlers and stars, offerings to the wilderness itself. Hikers began reporting strange sensations, low vibrations beneath their feet, faint humming that pulsed through the air. Some said it came from the ground, others from the trees. A few swore that, on still nights, they could see pale lights flickering deep in the valley, not stars, but something moving through the fog. The Denali disappearance, as it was now called, had become modern folklore. Guides warned travelers to stay away from the White Woods, and those who ignored the warnings often returned shaken, claiming the forest felt alive, watching, waiting. The woods hum at night, they'd say, and sometimes the lights follow you. But the strangest discovery came not from locals or hikers, but from the Park Service itself. In late autumn of 2023, a park ranger named Evan Holt was cataloging trail camera footage from the upper ridges, part of a wildlife study that had nothing to do with the case. The recordings were mostly mundane: moose, wolves, snowstorms sweeping through, but one file, timestamped 2:17 a.m., caught his eye. At first, it showed nothing, just mist curling through the trees, faint moonlight glinting off the frost. Then, two figures appeared. They were walking side by side through the fog. Both wore heavy coats and carried rifles slung across their backs. Their movements were slow, deliberate, as if trekking through deep snow. Evan assumed it was just old footage of hikers, until one of the figures turned toward the camera, even through the static. The face was unmistakable. It was Cole Turner. The second figure, slightly ahead of him, didn't look back. He was taller, broader, matching Brett Lawson's build. The video ended abruptly, cutting to black. When investigators tried to recover more frames, they found that the file's final timestamp had changed. It no longer read 2023, it now read 2011, the year they disappeared. The ranger who first reviewed the footage resigned a month later, refusing to speak to the press. But those who saw it couldn't forget what came next. In the final second before the feed cut out, a faint shimmer of light spread across the snow, not from the camera, not from the moon, but from somewhere within the fog. Some said it was just a glitch. Others weren't so sure. Today, the ridge remains off limits, officially listed as unstable terrain, but hikers still come, leaving candles and carvings at the tree lean. At night, the wind moves strangely there, carrying with it something like a voice. And sometimes, when the fog settles low over the valley, two shapes can be seen moving slowly through it, side by side, silent and endless. Because some places don't just take you, they wait until you find your way back.